Welcome to today's webinar with Arts Council England, looking at plans and priorities for the coming year. My name's Sarah Mears. I'm the Programme Manager for Libraries Connected, and I'm joined today on the call by Robert Davis, who's under the pseudonym of Libraries Connected, if you see him on the screen at the moment, and he's doing all the sort of technical support today and busy letting people in as we speak. So it's an hour-long webinar and we will be recording it today. So if you don't want to be on screen, feel free to turn your camera off, although it is always nice to see people's faces. I think when people are talking, it's nice to actually talk to people rather than blank squares on the screen. But yes, feel free to turn it off if you don't want to be recorded. Please do put any questions in the chat. And we will be having a Q&A at the end of the session this morning. If you could keep your mics off whilst the presenters are speaking, that would be really, really helpful. We're delighted to be joined by three colleagues from Arts Council England. So we've got Luke Burton, Director for Libraries and Arts for Arts Council England, Sophie Lancaster, who's the Senior Manager for Libraries, and Alison Houlihan, who's from the Libraries Development Team. So I think Luke and Alison are going to be speaking, and Sophie is joining us as well so that she can answer and respond to some of the Q&A. So as I say, do put questions in the chat as we go through, and we'll either be answering as we go, or there'll be plenty of time at the end for a discussion. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Luke.
Thanks, Sarah, and morning everyone. Yeah, good to see some people and some familiar names on there as well. I'm now going to do the obligatory try and share my screen and hope that it works. So let's see what happens. Can we see that?
Yeah, it's looking good. Just need to go into slideshow,
Right.
Luke.
I'm about to go into slide mode, so I won't be able to see anyone, so I'll be in a room talking to myself. If anything goes wrong, just give me a shout. Right, let's try it. Okay, so yeah, thanks again for joining us today. So as Sarah said, I'm Luke Burton. I'm the Director for Libraries at Arts Council England, and we really wanted an opportunity just to speak to you in the sector, speak to colleagues working out there about our plans and priorities for the coming year, to give a bit more visibility to what we're doing. So the plan is that I'll go through a few points, and then Alison, I'm going to hand over to Alison, who will go into a bit more detail on the accreditation work that we've been doing, looking at how that's been developing. So I wanted to try and set the scene a bit, give you a bit of an overview of where we are, and then we'll try and give you a bit of detail on those upcoming plans. So this is obviously probably not, I don't need to be telling you this, you're the ones who are living and breathing the current situation that we're working in, but I think it's worth highlighting, you know, where we're coming from with the work that we're doing. And obviously it squarely sits with the situation that you're all facing. So we are working in that context of local government finance crisis, if you like, the issue that's being faced there, and also the concurrent sort of cost of living that people are going through, the difficulties that people are facing. I think it's still worth highlighting that we are still in that post-March 2020, post-COVID sort of world where things, although it seem like they are broadly back to where they were, there are still some lingering effects of it being felt around people's behaviour and how people are doing things. I think we do still have, in that context, we are looking at workforce development and retention. So again, in that post-COVID time, we've seen people look at changing the work-life balance, changing where they work, how they work. But also we have to looking at that development of people into the profession, progressing through the profession, and then what happens when we have people who leave, and how we replace those lost leaders in there, that skills and experience that we lose. I think devolution is an interesting context for us to be working in. I'm mindful that not everyone here will be covered by a combined authority, but now that we've had the recent set of elections, over 50% of England's population are now covered by a devolution deal, and some places like here in the northeast, everywhere is. So the Northeast Combined Authority and the Tees Valley, you know, the entire population up here is covered by one of those deals. I think there's some really interesting opportunities and potential challenges for how devolved responsibility to the combined authorities could help support libraries, and how libraries could help support them. I think we continue to be in a difficult, or an ongoing position around advocacy and awareness. I think there still is, and you'll be experiencing it more than most, a lack of understanding in many ways about what a modern library service delivers, what you get from a modern library, and making the case that libraries are relevant and important to people at various points in their lives. obviously we see people coming in, whether it's through having children, applying for jobs, setting up businesses, needing support with health and well-being, needing to print a bus pass or a boarding pass. There are various touch points in people's lives, but I think we do still struggle with that wider advocacy piece and awareness raising. I think emerging technologies have been and continue to be an important part for libraries to play. Libraries have adapted across, decades, whether that's been to the people's network, an increased need for mobile device, Wi-Fi connectivity. Libraries continue to respond to those demands, and I think we're going to see an acceleration of that around the need for libraries to support people in using emerging technologies, particularly around artificial intelligence and the potential risks to further digital exclusion that they could raise. So I think there's some important issues for us to face there. There is also this idea as well around future planning and future development. So some of you have hopefully seen the research that CILIP created called Come Rain or Shine, which was looking at futures literacy. And if not, then it's worth having a look at the document. But it talks about the need for social infrastructure as well as digital infrastructure. And I think through work like the Libraries Improvement Fund, the DCMS fund the Arts Council manage, there's an opportunity there to develop that digital and social infrastructure to support communities. Partnership building and supporting multiple agendas as well as continues to be an area that libraries work really well in, but continue to do, and whether that's building partnerships to share premises and deliver services, or whether it's about supporting the agendas of other colleagues in council departments like public health. I think that's going to continue to be an important role for libraries to play. Excuse me. And I think there is that wider context as well, understanding where libraries sit within the cultural context, within public health, within business support, and you'll all sit within local authorities where your department has different pushes and pulls on your time. And some of you will see arts council as that cultural support work, and others, it's going to be more about for us to demonstrate how we can support you. So just not assuming necessarily an understanding of what Arts Council's role is, we are the sector development agency for libraries. We're an arm's length body of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And we have a remit to support all 152 library services across England. I think it's 152. There seems to be some debate on that, but that's a data point to come to later. We don't deliver core funding for libraries, but what we do is we deliver support through our national portfolio funding and other forms of grant funding. We chair the English Public Libraries Working Group, which came out of the Libraries Task Force, and that seeks to bring together sector support organisations like CILIP, Libraries Connected, ASCL, British Library, and LGA and others to kind of trying to have a strategic approach to how we support the sector, understand each other's projects, and how we can best deliver programs and activities that can support you in your day-to-day running of services. As I said, grant funding is a key part of what Arts Council do. That there's both the Libraries Improvement Fund, which the last round is we've just awarded those. That's round 3, but also through National Lottery project grants and other bits of grant funding that library services can access, and we'll talk about them in a bit more detail later. We also look to produce research and guidance and best practice that we can help support you in day-to-day delivery and also with your strategic planning as well. So trying to look at where the gaps are in some of that research and guidance, and are there ways that we can work with other organisations to produce information that's useful for all of you. And then I think the advocacy role is still a key one for us. As I said, there's a challenge there about promoting the value of libraries. I think we all know, and I think we all understand the value and benefit of them and what they can deliver. But I think there's a greater role for us to do as Arts Council, as a national organisation, spreading that message to other sectors and to other partners, and then also how do we work up to national government as well, advocating for the work that you all do. So the national portfolio, which is organisations that we fund, has actually grown in the last round. So the last round was just announced in 2022, and that's for 3 years, and it's been extended for a year. But that was an increase from 6 to 16 library services, so a tripling in the investment for the portfolio. It's still less than 1% of the whole investment, but what we keep saying internally is, but look at what's been done with that. look at how much impact and the range and the quality of services have been delivered for what is a relatively modest sum within the much wider portfolio funding. We also fund two very strong investment principal support organisations, and I'm not saying that just because Libraries Connected is one of them, and ASCL, the Association of Senior Children's and Education Librarians, is the other one. And they've got really important roles to play in doing a lot of that support for you around delivery, development, strategy, and advocacy as well. So it's great to have both of those organisations with slightly different slants. The portfolio has a really good geographic spread. So from South Tyneside, just down the road here in the north, right down to Libraries Unlimited down in Devon, across London boroughs, Midlands, Northwest. There's a really good representation across geographic spreads as well as different delivery models. So some like Inspire in Nottinghamshire or York Explore are spin outs from the local authority and are commission services. Others are run directly by the local authority. Some have a focus on children and young people. Some have a focus on creativity and arts. There's a real range, and I think we're really proud of the work, the breadth and depth of the work that the portfolio organisations do in delivering to communities. It's work that they've always done, but the funding from Arts Council allows them to build on that and build those new and different programmes. And as I said, the current round is being extended by a year, but we'll be starting to look in 26, 27 as to what the next funding round looks like. So we're interested in trying to get a picture of what the interest is in being a portfolio organisation when the next round comes by, and also within Arts Council, we need to try and understand what our aspirations are in terms of that portfolio. I think National Lottery project grants, we continue to talk about these quite a lot. They're a key avenue for us around investment, and they show we have a continued commitment to invest in libraries. So there's been over 5 million invested since 2016 across all of Arts Council's areas. And there's different types of projects. We see some of those are where libraries are delivering directly as the funded organisation, and some of those are where libraries are the delivery vehicle. So working in partnership with people like the Reading Agency or with other organisations to deliver, and libraries being a key partner and a venue to deliver that. We had some roadshows recently where we were looking at trying to provide more information on how those applications are made and trying to encourage people to make them, because we're mindful that it's not straightforward and easy. It's not just something that can be done on a whim. There's a capacity requirement there. There's a skills requirement to put those together. So we're mindful that there are challenges with putting grant applications together. But as part of the commitment towards that, we do have time limited priority around the universal library offers. So those things like including health and wellbeing and information in digital and reading, which speaks to the fact that Arts Councils understand that libraries deliver beyond the traditional cultural and creative activity that Arts Council have focused on, that you reach into multiple areas of people's lives and have the skills and experience to support a number of different strands of work. So the time limited priority around the Universal Library offers is open to public libraries in the statutory service, and we'd encourage people to go and have a look at those, and also to build partnerships with other organisations where the library might be the lead applicant, but you may have those new partnerships with other organisations that might help you deliver. And if you're interested in project grants, then I'd encourage people to get in touch with their relationship manager in area. We've got 7 Arts Council library relationship managers across the piece. Our delivery plan is in the process of being finalised, and that's kind of the public document that is published that says what are our plans and priorities for the upcoming year. So I wanted to mention what they were, but also to reflect that while there's a small number in there of actions in the delivery plan, there's a number of things that sit behind that. So that's not all that we'll be doing around delivery. So within the delivery plan, we continue that commitment to support libraries to apply for project grants, and we've got an aspiration to increase the number, particularly through libraries and museums. We're also working on a micro grants program, again speaking to that point where there's a lot of time and effort needed to put together a full application. Is there a way we can support smaller, less burdensome applications that might allow people to do smaller but impactful pieces of work, and also give people experience of that grant writing process. So that's something that's in development at the moment. The libraries development framework, previously been calling accreditation, is also a priority for us. That Alison will talk to that in much more detail later on. But that was developed by Libraries Connected and Shared Intelligence, and we're committed to getting that rolled out over the coming months. Obviously, be aware as well that there was Baroness Sanderson had her review of libraries that published earlier in the year, and there's also an upcoming strategy as well from DCMS, and it's a priority for us to support the actions and the delivery of that strategy as an arm's length body of government. And then also Library On, which is the project that we funded with the British Library to deliver this platform, a single front door digital presence for understanding what the library service delivers and accessing some digital functionality as well. So that project's ongoing, and our funding for that runs just towards the end of this year. But they're the kind of the headline ones that sit within our delivery plan that we'll see published. I'm sure you'll all be reading our delivery plan cover to cover, as well as Alison and Sophie and I. But they're the main actions that will come out of that. But there are ongoing projects as part of that. So as I said, there's the Libraries Development Framework, there's Library On as part of that. We've also got work on a piece of data as well, or data-related project. So for quite a lot of time, we've talked about the irony of an information profession not having a good handle on its data. And we spend a lot of time even talking about how many branches are there in England, what do issue figures look like, what do we mean by an issue figure. I'm sure some of you still provide your data to SIPFA, and I know there are some local authorities that are doing interesting work at a local level on understanding their data and how that can inform their decision making. But we're keen to try and understand how we can support you at a local level, take some of that burden off you in terms of handling, storing, and then feeding that data back to you that will have value at a local, regional, and national level. So I know when I was head of service in Newcastle, the question was always how many people have visited Denton Burn Library, what's the most popular book at Gosforth, how many people visited City Library in November. And we want to be able to provide something that'll do that, but we also want to be able to provide something that'll give a picture at a regional level, where those of you in a combined authority could say, well, actually, as a Libraries Connected group, here's the impact and here's what we're delivering across that combined authority footprint, or maybe across a consortia footprint. But then also at a national level, how can we use that data so that sector support organisations and development organisations like us, but also DCMS and government as well, how can we use that data to get a real picture of what's happening across libraries? We all know sort of instinctively the really good work the libraries do, and it's not just to reduce things down to some basic numbers. We want to really be able to say, okay, this is built on a firm foundation, and so that we can advocate and we can make that case for whether it's securing investment from other partner organisations or reporting to different elements of government. We want to be able to put that on a firm footing, and we don't want to add burden to you as library leaders and your teams who are doing the really important work of supporting communities on a day-to-day basis. So we want to see how we can take some of that burden on for you. We've got a number of priorities as well, and don't worry, I'll stop rambling soon, and I'll hand over to Alison to do some more detail on the framework. But I think there's a few priority areas for us as well that we can work around. So reading for pleasure continues to be a priority across all of Arts Council. We work closely with our literature team, and reading for pleasure is something that comes up a lot. There's a round table of those that Sunic Sirota chairs, and we talk a lot about libraries are more than books, and it's difficult to get the terminology right, because if libraries were only books, that would be fine. And if people are coming in to read, and apology, I'll pick Harry Potter because it's what I read. But if people are coming in to just read Harry Potter, then that's fine. It's not about that judgment. It's about people getting the joy and the value from reading, and those further links onto increased literature and mental health well-being. I think we're interested in the social and digital infrastructure that libraries provide. So as I say, the research that CELIP did looking at futures literacy, so it was intended not to look at what's going to happen, what should be libraries be doing in the next 2-3 years, but what should libraries be doing as we move towards 2030, 2040, 2050? Um, and some of the stuff that came out of there was really interesting, but not least of all that there's this requirement for, there's going to be this need for social infrastructure to combat isolation and loneliness. The work that you've, again, been doing before there were warm spaces, before things were branded in certain ways, you've been doing this day in and day out as part of your work for decades. So how do we provide those safe spaces that people can come? They're not expected to spend money. They can interact if they want to, but they've also just got a safe place to be. But also, how do we provide that digital infrastructure that supports people who are at risk of being digitally excluded or who can't afford the digital infrastructure? I think it's interesting looking at, we're coming up to, it's not far off. I'm going to get my sums wrong now and show my age, but it's not far off, sort of 30 odd years since the People's Network came in back at the back end of the 90s. And I think if we did that again, that was a huge investment in PCs and computers across the country. And again, there's been investment in Wi-Fi through Arts Council and others in the past. But actually now, if we're looking to do that investment, then we'd be looking a lot more at agile working and touchdown space and PowerPoints, and where can people use their good quality Wi-Fi with their laptops. But that's not to say that everyone has that, and there's still that requirement to support those people who don't have the skills or the confidence to access digital technologies and or the finances to have their own. So we're very mindful that there is that mixed picture in the digital infrastructure that libraries are going to be critical in supporting. Then there's questions as well around future libraries and how libraries develop. Again, libraries have been really responsive and adaptive and fleet of foot, and did that through COVID. I know there's colleagues on the call here from Newcastle who were just phenomenal in getting things moving quickly and supporting communities and working with colleagues. And you'll have examples from across your services as well. And it's brilliant to be able to be adaptive like that. But how do we plan for the long term? How do we plan for the long-term future of libraries when we're responding to demand? So I think there's an interesting point there about looking at what libraries' role will be in the coming decades and how it supports the sort of big societal challenges. And again, I suppose that comes back to including the governance of libraries. So what is the role that devolved administrations and combined authorities can play in supporting the delivery of libraries, mindful that there's a statutory requirement for local authorities to deliver that library service either directly or through commission services. But I think it's an interesting point to be looking at. Again, I think emerging technologies, whether that's around how people access the internet, how people use artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality. I know a lot of services are starting to look at that sort of extended reality projects where whether it's headsets or whether it's augmented reality through apps. I think there's a really interesting space there for libraries to continue to provide access to those kind of things. It's back to Arts Council are really cognizant of the fact that libraries are this, phenomenally hyper-local, rich, interlinked network of community spaces across the country, and but they are all, they are cultural institutions in and of themselves with a much lower barrier of access than, say, theatres or a doctor's surgery or a business support centre. And often libraries are where people get their first taste of cultural experience, but also, as we know, libraries are those places where people will come across the door and ask anything and everything. So how do people get the opportunity to access emerging technology in communities? And also, how do I think business support and health and well-being, again, I think will be priorities for us, but also potentially for libraries, that demonstrating that libraries can have a real impact at a much lower cost, much earlier in a process. So whether it's business and IP centres seeing survival of SMEs for much longer, or for setting up more SMEs that are by diverse leaders or by women, how do we continue that rich support for business growth? And then also around health and well-being, and again, you'll all know better than I do, that ability to provide and support for people in terms of their physical and mental well-being, whether that is through actual collections about people supporting the health and well-being, but also just that sort of social prescribing, if you like, of activity that comes through libraries. So you don't have to keep listening to me ramble, and because, as ever at Arts Council, there are a myriad of people who do the much more detailed and much more difficult work. around things. I'm going to hand over to Alison around the library's development framework to go through those. I'm mindful again that I can't see anyone, but I will move Alison's slides along if Alison just asks me to do that. So if I hand over to you, Alison.
Thanks, Luke. Okay, there we go. So a key update at first, if you're not already aware, and as Luke has just mentioned, the name of the programme has moved away from accreditation and is now known as the Libraries Development Framework. So this will be a national framework for libraries administered by Arts Council, where a library service can apply to be part of the framework to demonstrate and to evidence its commitment to ongoing development and innovation. So what's happened so far in the process to date? As you can see on your screen there, in 2019, Arts Council funded Libraries Connected to develop a draft accreditation scheme for libraries. So Libraries Connected worked with Shared Intelligence to do this work and involved the library sector in the co-design of the draft scheme. And I think library services took part in consultation workshops and in pilot assessment processes. The draft scheme was then published in 2022, and it recommended that Arts Council was best positioned to administer the scheme, which Arts Council's Executive Board agreed to in principle in October of 22. So we then began work on scoping how Arts Council could administer a library scheme in January of last year. And we did this by speaking with stakeholders and developing several potential delivery models for the scheme, and by proposing that change of name. And all these options were then taken back to Executive Board last summer, who agreed on the most efficient delivery model, and to Arts Council administering the library's development framework. So 2022, where we're up to now, Sophie and I are currently working with colleagues to design and build the application, which I'll speak more about in a few slides' time. Next slide, please, Luke. Oh, has it changed for everyone else? Because I can't see the next.
No.
No, okay.
I'm just trying, it is frozen on me, but I am just keeping.
Okay. But I'll keep speaking if you want, and then I'm sure the slides will catch up with us. So the next slide is just an overview of the content of the framework. So there we go. So it's just a reminder that the content has been taken directly from the draft scheme that Libraries Connected and Shared Intelligence worked on. It hasn't been altered to any great extent because essentially that scheme was created with and by you, the library sector. So the content of the framework is divided into 4 key areas. The people section looks at local need and how a service collects and analyses local data to meet this need, how a service develops its users and its non-users, and how a service engages users in the design of its offers. The place section asks if a library service aligns its offer with local priorities, and it also asks how the service collaborates with local partners to meet those priorities. The third section, purpose, looks at the vision of a library service and asks if this is aligned to the priorities of key stakeholders and whether it's reflected in service delivery. And it also asks if effective leadership is in place, and it looks how the service uses innovation to make best use of resources. And then the final section is around policy, how this is delivered in practice, including workforce development. Next slide, please, Luke. Okay, so the application. So we're currently working on the first iteration of an application. We want the application to be as practical and accessible and streamlined as possible. The application will be hosted on Arts Council's Grantium system. Each section within the application will contain a number of questions, each with an essential requirement that the library service must address within a free text answer, along with referring to a range of other relevant examples of their work. There are other types of questions in the form of multiple choice checkboxes, and these are to demonstrate the range of resources or data that a library service uses. And applicant guidance will be embedded within the application form, and that's to save you having to go back into between countless information sheets, because we really do want to make this as streamlined as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an overview of the application process as it stands at the moment. And just to reiterate again, it is still very much a draft process. So each year there will be a window for library services to apply to become part of the framework. And the window will be closed early if a predetermined number of applications is received. A library service will submit their application and a relationship manager will assess it. All decisions will then go to our National Investment Panel for final sign-off. If an application is assessed as met or strong met, the library service will become part of the framework for 5 years, after which they can then reapply. And if an application is assessed as not met, then the library service will receive a development statement and guidance from their relationship manager to further develop their application, after which they can then resubmit. Next slide, please, Luke. So, why might a library service consider applying to be part of the framework? Well, working through the framework will enable libraries to demonstrate what they do and who they do it for, and to further evidence their community benefit. It'll help libraries to align with local and national policy and to demonstrate cross-sectoral working. And because the framework is focused on development, it'll help to drive and focus improvement in the service. And most importantly, becoming part of the framework will support advocacy at local and national levels. Next slide, please, Luke. Okay, so this is my final slide before I'll hand back to Luke for questions. So just to reiterate, the application is still very much a draft process, and we very much want and need feedback on this. We are currently testing the application with a handful of library services who have very kindly given up time to help us, which we greatly appreciate. We will also be approaching key stakeholders for their input into this. And then we will, of course, incorporate all feedback into the process before building the system on Grantium. And we will continue to keep you updated over the next few months as we get nearer to the launch of the framework. So now I will hand back to Luke, who I think will take questions along with Sophie.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, and so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second because we thought it was useful to try and give that overview of where we are in terms of plans and priorities for the upcoming year. But mindful as well that selfishly, from our point of view, we've got what's like over 160 people in the virtual room, and really interested to hear in terms of you where any questions you've got for us, any comments, anything that you think would be we should be focusing on. Mindful that it's a good opportunity to speak to all of you, and also we're happy to pick up conversations after, whether it's I'm happy to pick up conversations or whether it's relationship managers in area as well.
Thanks, Luke. Whilst we're on the subject of the framework, I think it's James Pearson has asked about whether the slides could be shared, but actually someone else has asked if all the slides could be shared. So we will be sending out the presentation as a video, but if we could share the slides as well, that would be great. James, did you want to unmute and just ask your question about the desktop evidence review?
Yeah, just interested. Really helpful presentation. So thank you. Yeah, I'm getting from the presentation that basically we submit the evidence, make that as full as possible, but that essentially the assessment of where we are on the framework is basically sort of covered by just a review of that evidence and bits. I appreciate sort of want to make it as simple as possible, but equally, obviously, there's some quite meaty topics in there as to how much people sort of will want to upload and bits. So just a bit of a question around the assessment itself, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something about, and happy for Sophie and Alison to come in, but there's definitely something about making this as, you know, not putting a huge burden on you to do it, but also it's got to be worth something. So I think there's been conversation about, for example, there might not always be a need to provide an example of it. You know, if in some cases for some things it might be enough to tell us that you have it. So does the council have an equality and diversity framework? We don't need to necessarily see it. We just need to know there'll be some things that your organisations will be required to have. So it's just you know, ticking to say that you do have it. I think what we've said is it shouldn't be easy to get accreditation, but it should be easy. The process should be easy. So it'll be a mixture of some of it. There'll be an ask for the actual evidence of it, and others will take a tick on the boxes as enough to say that it does exist.
Thanks, Luke. And someone's also asked, Jules has asked, is the membership of the framework free, or is there a subscription charge?
It'll be free. There's no, again, this isn't about adding, you know, burden to local authorities. So there will be no cost to the application. We're mindful that the framework is it's new, it's in development, and part of the rationale for sitting with the Arts Council is that the Arts Council administers the museums accreditation, and which is a different beast and a sort of a well-established over 10-year process. So we're very much earlier in that. So that framework or that accreditation comes with certain. Once you've got it, it allows you to do certain things, and if you don't have it, there's certainly what we're really at the early stages of is saying this is about service delivery, about how you demonstrate where you are and how you might improve on that. But it's not about there'll be no cost to it. Absolutely not.
Right, yeah, thank you. And then there's a couple of questions about whether this framework links into other parts of Arts Council's funding. So Richard's asked, will being part of the library's development framework become part of or a requirement of the MPO process in future? And E. Barwell said, is the intention to have future grant funding dependent on whether a service has accreditation or is on the framework?
It's something that's been in conversation. It's not at the moment, but that is certainly how the museum's accreditation works. That's not the intention in the early days of the program. It is something that, you know, has been discussed, but that's not. It's not linked to any of our funding at the moment. What we're kind of saying is with the library's accreditation or library's framework, it's a finite group. We know there's 152 potential organisations that would be applying for it and would be able to gain it. Whereas through museums, you know, there's a much higher number, and it's like say it's well established and been long running. So I think hopefully the intention is that this will develop over time. But what we're expecting to see in those first couple of rounds is maybe 20 to 30 libraries applying and seeing what it means. Because in theory, an unsuccessful application would still give you and this is why you were unsuccessful and how you could develop that. So at the moment, it's not linked to any of our funding or our MPO activity. Certainly not this round and not the next round. But again, we want it to develop over time.
Thank you. And Helen just wanted to clarify something I think that Alison said. She said, did you say the application process will close early if a certain number is reached before the closing deadline? And can you expand on why, please?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so as it currently stands in our draft process, we're thinking that there'll be a predetermined number of libraries that will be able to apply in that first year and in the second year and so on. And that is with a mind on managing the workflow, managing capacity, and just to have a steady stream of applications year on year.
Alison, did you want to come back at all on that? Sorry, Helen. Helen, does that answer your question, Helen? I'm just checking.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. I think you said Alison again.
Yeah,
so I didn't.
Sorry, it was my fault.
No, that's helpful. I was just pondering that if you want to go for it, it sort of means you've got to go early. So having an end deadline seems odd if it can be closed before it. Just knowing what we like with getting things in at the last minute, actually.
We're thinking it's to manage capacity within Arts Council, and we understand that some libraries will be in a position sooner than others to apply, so they might be the first ones through, but then those other libraries who don't apply will have a year to develop an application to go year 2, year 3, year 4. Yeah, it's just to manage that capacity, really.
Okay, thank you.
And roughly how many services Anita wants to know? Is that a year, Alison?
We are still in the process of finalising that number, so I won't give anything away yet.
Okay, and John's just asked about deadlines for applications.
Yeah, so there'll be an application window to express for expressions of interest, which is your intent to apply. And then at the moment, we're thinking you will then get a 6-month window to complete that application before it's assessed.
Thank you.
But again, we haven't got a date for the launch yet. You know, the intention is to get it. We're looking to 2025 now, but we haven't got a firm date yet. But again, the intention is to come back to you across the sector and try to share this information with you.
Well, thank you. I'm just jumping back to the beginning, and then I will jump back to this if necessary. But project grants. There was a question about project grants right at the beginning of the presentation, which was from John again. But could you confirm if Arts Council are able to relax the requirement for match funding for project grants in the light of current challenges and pressures?
I mean, I don't know if Sophie may have anything this, but I would say that there's no hard and fast rule on it. I think it's really just down to the fact that it is it's a competitive grant process, so there are a number of organisations. So it's not a hard and fast rule. You must have X amount. But I think what we would say is it's good to be clear that the in-kind contributions that you have, you know, valuing your staff time and your the contributions that will come from the service, being mindful that there's a value to that. I don't know if Sophie had anything to add on.
Yeah, and also just to say, we're fully aware, obviously, of the inflationary costs. So if you have contingency budgets, it's quite clear to us that you've thought this through. It's much easier for us to make a decision.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And James is James, did you want to come in again?
Happy to, yeah, no, and absolutely understand that there's a capacity question of how many people could get through at once. It just feels a little odd from the sector point of view if it's sort of only a sort of few that can go at a time, and it's just how perhaps that's managed and communicated as to who gets in first. What does that mean for those that don't? And I get there's sort of years 2 and 3 and bits, but yeah, just and whether you look at it as a pilot, I don't know. It's just a sort of few things. If it's either the sector's all in or the sector isn't in, I don't know. I appreciate it's a huge task, but yeah, just an initial thought on that one. It just feels a little bit odd.
No, and it's a good point, and it's one for us to feedback. I mean, I think we're being really optimistic and hoping that we'll get 152 applications in the first 6 months. You know, and it might not be that that's an issue, but I think it's just trying to recognise that there's the capacity from our side. But I think it's worth us feeding back that that's what we're hearing from you, is that is there a way we can manage that? So it's useful to hear.
Thanks, Luke. And Diane's asked about mentoring and support for library authorities who are unsuccessful. She said help to encourage libraries to strive to improve and demonstrate to elected members, decision makers.
Yeah, I mean that's partly kind of reflected, I think, in the fact that it's a development framework. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Alison, is that there is, you know, if the responsible, if you're not successful, it'll be where those gaps are. The intention is to provide that development.
Okay, yeah, so, both successful and unsuccessful applicants will receive a development statement, which will include support and advice on what possible next steps can be. And also unsuccessful applicants will receive guidance, one-to-one guidance from relationship manager as well.
Thank you. Is there going to be kind of additional capacity at Arts Council? Because I can imagine this could be quite a big piece of work each year, and not just knowing how the assessment process is that going to be factored in?
We've been talking to the investment centre team, and you know that they've had a restructure recently as well. So looking at capacity, so there is that. There's also, we're looking at how this would be assessed in area as well. So some of the detail is still being worked out in terms of who would be doing the assessments and how that decision is made. Obviously, we've got existing processes for grant giving or other processes, but I think we're looking at what this would look like in terms of an end-to-end process. So yeah, I think that's still kind of to be worked out.
Okay. I've just got lots of questions coming in. Tabitha's just raised her hand as well. Tabitha, do you want to ask your question? Okay. I'll maybe come back to Tabitha in a minute. I'm just looking. Well, before we come back to the questions about the framework, Eva, you asked a question earlier on about data. Is there a question you want to ask our Arts Council colleagues about data?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, just turning my camera on. Yeah, I mean, it was more perhaps just hijacking your webinar a little bit, just putting a shout out to see if anyone was doing any piece of work on data analysis development, because we've started one. And I just wanted to know if anyone had done something similar to compare notes. And I've had a couple of people reach out already. But from an Arts Council perspective, I don't know if you know of anyone or who's already doing it or doing it really well. So the kind of thing we're thinking about is really get a handle on all our data. We brought in a data analyst to really understand and compare with our ward-based census data and our deprivation data and health data and all of that, and ultimately trying to build a Power BI dashboard that would help us understand and make the best use of our data on an ongoing basis. So yeah, it's just if you know of anyone who's already doing that and doing it really well.
There are a few services. I know that Simon and Reading, they've been doing some stuff. Reading Council had some good bits, and it might be worth a conversation as well with the Scottish Libraries Information Council. I know that different data sets, but they've done exactly that. So they've got a Power BI dashboard that integrates library data from across Scotland with demographics and public health and open data from Open Scotland. So happy to put you in touch with Pamela Tulloch and the team up there if that's helpful. But there are a number of library services. I'm sure some people here who are doing some really interesting work. But I know that Reading have been looking particularly at their data on a local level. And Simon's a member of the Libraries Connected, so I'm sure he'd be happy to get in touch.
Thank you.
He might even be here, and I'm speaking on his behalf.
Tabitha, I can see you've got your camera on now. Are you able to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I'm on my phone and I couldn't make it work. The joys of technology, eh? I just wanted to reflect on both the sharing of good practice, which I think is something we're all really interested in, but also the development and how Libraries Connected and ASCL can support library services with that development. So I've already started talking to Sophie and Alison about some of the tools that we have available, some of the training that we've got coming online, and how that can really support people in their development, but then in their applications as well. And I hope that we'll be able to really tap into that and build on that over time as we know how library services are going and what kind of things are needed really in terms of that development, so that it all feels very connected.
Thank you. Okay, and then there are some other suggestions. So thanks for that, Tabitha. And there's Sophia's also suggested rolling out region by region. Would that be easier? And would that be clearer to authorities? And then Simon's also asked about, would it be fair to assume the aim is for all public libraries to be part of the framework, but phasing it in around 30 per year for practical purposes?
I mean, it's an entirely voluntary one, so there's no requirement to, but the aspiration would be that everyone would join. And I suppose to Matthew's question there as well, ultimately we'd like to see everyone part of it, but I think there's an opportunity for everyone to join. So I think that question around throttling applications is genuinely around capacity and nothing else really at the moment. So that might be one for us to consider a bit more. I do need to go and look some of the other directors in the whites of their eyes and say, we've got this framework coming on. But yeah, it's not about closing it to anyone on a permanent basis.
And do you think the framework will be, I suppose, will need to be regularly reviewed, won't it? Because as you know, the things that are perhaps aspirational now will become the norm, hopefully, and so it will need to have a constant, I guess, cycle of review.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's obviously, we were talking about it, I think the other day, weren't we, Sophie and Alison, around what the review process will look like, and there's a quite can-do attitude from the investment centre, which is, well, let's get this bit done, and the guidance will say, there will be a review process that will be developed. We might not have that detail initially, but you'll know how long the accreditation lasts for. So we're kind of giving ourselves a bit of headway as well to do some of that development, because some of it, the intention is, or we are testing it internally. And we'll be looking to come to Libraries Connected and ASCO as well with some of that testing of it. But ultimately, until it's live and being used in anger, if you like, that we'll not work out all the kinks in it. So yeah, it's going to be a living, breathing thing.
Brilliant. And pertinently, Luke Oakes asked, will the library's development framework be tied to the expected library strategy from DCMS? Will that strategy set a bar of service we will need to reach? Which roles, bodies will sit on the judging panel? So lots of questions in Luke's question.
So in reverse order, in terms of the assessment panel, we're still working out what it's going to be. We have existing processes, whether that's decision making through executive board members that are empowered, or whether it's through national council or area councils. But what we are trying to make sure is that there is a clear process that's transparent as to how that decision was made, and mindful that there needs to be a good representation from libraries on there in terms of making that decision. There needs to be people who know about library services on there. So the panel is we're still working what that decision making route will look like, and again we'll come back as that's ironed out. I think in terms of this isn't linked to the strategy, in that it was in development prior to that work being worked on. I think what I would say around the relationship with DCMS and government is that we've been clear, and DCMS has been clear, is that accreditation or being part of the framework wouldn't then be saying, and therefore I am comprehensive and efficient. It doesn't trump, or it doesn't replace the statutory duties that come under the Act. So there will be a mechanism whereby if there are services that are facing a challenge or a review under the Act, then we would look at that. There might be a case of, if you were in the process of applying for accreditation, then we might pause it. If you already had it, we'd have to wait and see what the outcome of that was, to then see if there was an impact. So again, some of this is going to be in the detail in terms of it rolling out. But I think what we need to be clear in saying is this doesn't replace any duties under the Public Libraries Act, and it isn't a measure of comprehensive and efficient. It is very much about the development of services.
Plowing through the questions, I don't want to miss any questions. No, I think we've picked any up. If anyone can unmute and shout if they haven't had their question answered, because I don't want to miss anybody. Don't think so. I think we've got them all, and I guess I'm sure Luke, you'll be open to questions. Oh, we've just got to that's people. Oh, that's Simon talking about his data work. No, I think that's it. I'm just searching through to make sure we haven't missed any questions. But Luke, I'm sure you'll be able to answer any questions offline if needs be.
Absolutely.
So I think in that case we can give you a couple of minutes back at the end of this webinar, and just to say a big thank you to Luke and Alison and Sophie for contributing this morning and being so responsive. I think there's obviously a lot of interest in that framework, Luke. It's based on this call, so we'll look forward to hearing a lot more about it. But just to say a big thank you to all three of you for coming this morning and talking to us today, and enjoy the rest of your week, everybody, and enjoy the sunshine while it lasts too. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.